Welcome, everybody, to a special edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. I am your host, Art Stapleton, and well, as they say every year at this time here at 1925 Giants Drive, school's out for summer. The off-season program is finished, and the next time we will be back here watching the New York Giants run around on the practice field, they will be getting ready for the 2025 regular season. Finished up today with a relatively quick practice out there on the fields behind the training facility here at MetLife, or at least in the parking lot of MetLife. So I figure let's catch up the last couple weeks, but really more along the lines of the last couple days. Do an episode, send us off into a little bit of a summer hiatus, and then we'll be back. Training camp. Giants report date for the veterans is July 22nd. That's not official, but a week before then, the rookies will be reporting, so they'll have a week before the veterans get here, and then the full team will be here on the 22nd, which typically means that on July 23rd, that will be the first practice of training camp. All right, so a lot of different spots. I figure we're going to hit. We want to talk a little Jaxson Dart. Want to talk the quarterbacks in general. We had quite an interesting exchange that ended up going viral with Jameis Winston yesterday. So we'll have that video for you. And then we'll talk Abdul Carter. We had the defensive assistant coaches today. Charlie Bullen, the outside linebackers coach, was excellent on what Abdul Carter brings. Also, Andre Patterson, defensive line coach, obviously one of the most respected coaches in the NFL, has coached a lot of talented players. He had his thoughts on Abdul Carter and a comparison. And then we'll talk about the depth chart a little bit and then pack it up, ring the bell, and get ready for summer vacation, albeit about 5 weeks for everyone to go off and spend their time however they'd like to before the Giants reconvene here at MetLife for year 4 of the Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen regime. All right, so let's start with the quarterbacks. I think that's probably the best place to go, and we'll hit them one by one. And the first one you talk about is QB1. Right now on June 18th, it's Russsell Wilson. And he's been quarterback 1 since he signed here, and he's done nothing this spring to lose the job. I think, if I'm being honest, I thought Russsell Wilson would come here and have a lot of miles per hour off his fastball, to be perfectly honest. I didn't know what to expect from Russ. And what I've seen is confidence, command, poise, and just an overall control of not just the room, but the offense. And he's purposeful with what he does. You know, I thought Tommy DeVito said it well after practice today. He said, Russ has an intent, and he's a very intentional speaker and communicator with not just the quarterbacks in the QB room, but the entire team. And yes, sometimes that comes off as a bit phony, maybe not as genuine, because Russ is so polished. So sometimes you want to see a little roughness around the edges. But I think overall, if you're treating Russsell Wilson as to what he showed this spring, and again, we all understand this spring is a lot different than training camp, and then when the pads go on, and then ultimately when the season starts down in Landover, when it's the Giants and Commanders in week 1, look, you're going to move the goalposts. You're going to judge Russsell Wilson and this team differently then as you do now. But as I said, I think Russsell Wilson has done everything right. Every teammate that talks about Russ just talks about that presence. You know, Jaxson Dart has aura. Russsell Wilson has presence. I think that's the best way to put it. You know, he won a Super Bowl in MetLife Stadium right over there. And I know that was a while ago, but when he comes back into this locker room and he has the same locker, let's not forget the Seattle Seahawks used the Giants training facility here that week for the Super Bowl. And Russell Wilson has the same locker here at the Giants facility that he did that week for the Super Bowl. So it kind of brings a little bit of cachet, if you will, for Russell Wilson. And ultimately, it's going to be how he performs between the lines. And there's a lot to be said about how things tailed off in Pittsburgh last year and how he was able to get this team and hold off Justin Fields as the starting quarterback. And he got the Steelers to the playoffs, but they ended up losing their final 5 games and lost in the playoffs. And then Russell was out of town. So it's been Seattle, Denver, Pittsburgh, now the Giants here for Russell. And, look, it's obvious Russell Wilson wants to be here. It's not obvious how many other opportunities Russell Wilson had, to be perfectly honest, to be the starting quarterback. Brian Daboll and Joe Shane need quality play from Russell Wilson as much as Russell Wilson needed a quality opportunity to be the starter that the New York Giants afforded him. So for $10 million, I know there are incentives built into the contract, but for a 1-year, $10 million guaranteed contract, the Giants are hoping that this is a partnership that yields positive results for both sides. Then that brings us to Jameis Winston. And what's funny is that Jameis Winston's personality now precedes him no matter where he goes. And I had an exchange with Jameis yesterday. I was pretty happy with the question. I didn't plan on going in asking Jameis what I asked him. But sometimes you have to be thinking on your feet and call an audible and be engaged in the news conference. And I was, and I thought Jameis's answer was much better than A, I could have ever hoped, or B, really better than my question. So we put that video together. We got my question and Jameis's answer. We'll run that now, and then we'll come back and I'll talk to you about Jameis Winston and what I've seen from him here as a Giant.
Jameis, when people talk about you when you were coming here and even throughout your career, the first thing they say is what a character, what a personality. Does that ever bother you that they want to talk about that first and not mention who you are as a football player? Or are you comfortable with that, and does that make you want to go?
I'm grateful that I can bring joy to the game. I'm grateful that through my hard work and effort on the football field that people notice me by my character. So that's just something that comes with it. This is the greatest game in the world. So we need to be able to drop our hair a little bit and notice that everyone has their own individual role. And I know what I've done in this NFL league in terms of playing football. And I'm grateful that I had that experience. But I also know that when I first came into this league, that I wasn't looked upon as a man of high character. I wasn't looked upon as that team-oriented guy. I had this perception of me that just wasn't true. And through my course of diving in and growing every single year, I've proven myself to be who I am. And I think that is the greatest compliment that someone can give you, is that you're truly who you are, despite the character or the giggles. I think if you ask any of my teammates, any of my coaches, who I am, they would say Jameis is truly who he is.
Jameis, can you talk about it?
So there you go, Jameis Winston. And my question, he kind of took it a little bit off to a tangent. I asked him about being a character. He turned it into talking about his character, which is fine because that does precede Jameis Winston as well. I've gotten a lot of messages from people who have brought up Jameis's past and when he was portrayed as a selfish player, when he faced allegations of a really uncomfortable variety, that no charges were ever filed, but there was a settlement. So there had to be a learning curve and a growth period from that for Jameis Winston. And he kind of acknowledged that. But my question was, Are you bothered that whenever your name comes up, everyone wants to talk about Jameis the character? And it's really Jameis the caricature. And that is in a column that posted on NorthJersey.com this morning that I ended up writing, is that people forget. And yes, part of that is because Jameis Winston never reached the heights that people thought he would. But there is one overall number one pick in this entire building on this current roster, and that's Jameis Winston. I think that's forgotten sometimes because of what Jameis Winston has become. Now, part of that is his personality. Like I said, he's gregarious. He makes jokes. He sometimes says some things that are just wacky. Case in point, last week, Darius Slayton's story about Jameis and how you can be talking about how he wants you to run a slant, and then the next thing you know, the conversation turns to Kentucky Fried Chicken. And he's like, wait a minute, am I tripping or are you tripping? And he said that the thing about Jameis that people don't appreciate, and now he does, this is Slayton, now he does about Winston, is that Winston still takes the football pretty importantly. And I think that's kind of lost because Winston is an afterthought. As much as people want to blow by Tommy DeVito and his potential future here, let's not forget, Jameis Winston was a calculated signing by Joe Schoen. He was the first QB added to a room that was really a one-man show in Tommy DeVito. And when Jameis Winston signed here, he signed a 2-year deal. So Schoen was looking ahead, and I'm sure Winston was as well, that, yes, they'll probably sign another veteran quarterback. I told you that back when Winston was signed. It was Russsell Wilson. But there was also the idea that the Giants would draft a quarterback. Winston knew all this, and they essentially took the 1-year deal that Russsell Wilson signed and chopped it up into 2 years, this year and next year. So Jameis Winston is signed. So this idea that Jameis Winston is the perfect trade candidate. I mean, could it happen if somebody came and blew them away and Jaxson Dart made such an advancement that he's challenging Russsell Wilson for the starting job in September? So Russsell Wilson might be staring at a backup job. I mean, I guess that could happen. But I think there's value in having Jameis here. And I think there's value for Jaxson Dart as a rookie quarterback, knowing how things kind of flamed out for Jameis Winston and how he kind of reestablished himself in the league. And, there's still some good football in there from Jameis Winston. He's got a live arm. He's, like I said, gregarious. He's a guy that people want to play with. Jaxson Dart said that back during the draft process. He was asked, if you could name one quarterback you'd want to play with, who would it be? And he said Jameis Winston. So I think Jameis is kind of misunderstood at times. I think he's made, like he said to me, a lot is made of the sideshow. My words, not his, but he said, beyond the giggles, here's a football player who wants to do the best job he can as a teammate. And if he gets another opportunity to be a starter, he wants that opportunity. But right now, he's going to be the best teammate he can be. So I think it was pretty impressive from Jameis Winston. I got to be honest. I thought that answer, I hope you guys appreciated both where the question was coming from and his answer, because I think that kind of sets a tone for where Winston fits in this entire thing. Let's talk DeVito, and then we'll finish up with Jaxson Dart. Tommy DeVito met the media today. I've said this previously. I think Tommy DeVito has tremendous value in this offense until September, and then the debate can begin whether or not Tommy DeVito should be on the roster, should be on the practice squad, or should the Giants just say goodbye. He's the only one that knows this offense, has played in this offense on game day, in prime time, and has operated this offense well to what Brian Daboll wants. So any questions that, and I know, why would Russsell Wilson in his resume and Jameis Winston and even a rookie like Jaxson Dart, why would they turn to Tommy DeVito when they could turn to each other? Well, the bottom line is there is no experience like playing in this offense when the heat is on. And DeVito has done that. So any questions that can be answered might not necessarily be the best answers from the coaching staff because they're not calling the plays. They are not the ones that are out there having to call the shots, make the checks, and then run the offense. So that's why Tommy DeVito's here. I think he has a good relationship with Jaxson Dart. He's a valuable resource for Dart because let's be honest, Russsell Wilson is focused on getting this offense where it needs to be to win games come September. Now, that's obviously all the mission of all the quarterbacks. But for Russsell Wilson, he's not sitting here to be a mentor for Jaxson Dart. He can be a good teammate for Jaxson Dart, but he's got to be that valuable resource for himself and for the rest of the offense. So that's where Tommy DeVito fits. And look, a lot can happen between now and the beginning of September. There is no reason for the Giants to say goodbye to Tommy DeVito at this point, and there's no reason for Tommy DeVito to ask for his farewell from the Giants. Let things play out. We've seen things happen before. Injuries happen. Things take place where maybe you didn't expect things to happen. No one would have expected Darius Slayton to re-sign with the Giants this year, yet he has, and he's still a consistent part and a big role of this offense. So that's where we're at from that. Now let's talk Jaxson Dart. You know, I asked Dable the question yesterday. I went back to the draft. Dable talked about how their plan for Dart would be similar to Josh Allen, but not because of who the players are, but because of how you can bring a rookie along. And they talked about, and Dable talked specifically about, there will be times where we just throw Dart out there with the first team, and he's not going to know it's coming. And the players aren't going to know it's coming. And we've seen that through OTAs, and we saw that a little bit in the minicamp. Dart working with the first team and making sure that he gets these guys in the right spots, but also they can help him. When it's the starters, you know, Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton, they know this offense. So Jaxson Dart doesn't necessarily need to tell them where to be, but he can use them as valuable resources in the huddle to make sure he's calling the plays the right way and knows what he's asking for. But there's a flip side to that. Brian Dable talked about this when I asked him about it yesterday. I thought it was a great answer. It's not only about giving Dart opportunities with the first team. It's also seeing Dart and his growth with the third team. Let him spend a couple practices with the third team. Now, instead of dealing with Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton and Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary and John Michael Schmitz and Jermaine Illuminor and John Runyon, he's now dealing with guys who are fighting for backup spots, fighting for the practice squad. Now the coaches are watching Jaxson Dart to see how Jaxson Dart takes command of the position of quarterback. Does he value that communication with Daquan Felton, undrafted rookie, Juice Wells, his teammate at Ole Miss, another undrafted rookie? How's he communicating with Turbo Miller? He's got his tight ends out there. He's dealing with Bellinger and Greg Dulcich and a rookie in Thomas Fidone. That's the flip side of the growth process and the development of Jaxson Dart. And the Giants can learn just as much, maybe not even more, from testing Dart in those scenarios where he has to show how much he's learned versus playing with the first team. The first team experience is really all about how he handles it mentally. Can he stay on task? Can he handle the urgency? Can he handle the nerves? But when he's playing with guys who are learning this offense just as he is, how does he make sure guys are in the right spot? Does he make the right checks? Do guys follow his lead? So that's the interesting part of Jaxson Dart. And that's where we're at with the development of Jaxson Dart. I think we've covered it from where he's at. We're going to see where he's at. Right now, first team reps, second team reps, third team reps, they all matter for Jaxson Dart. This is not a competition to replace Russsell Wilson. Not yet. It's not there. Russsell Wilson is the first team quarterback. Russsell Wilson is the starter for week one. If we were deciding that right now, I don't expect that to change. What I like about Jaxson Dart great deep ball, unafraid to make mistakes in practice. There's a difference between making mistakes and making them because you don't see what you're supposed to be seeing. Jaxson Dart's mistakes in practice, some of them will come from that, but other interceptions have come from him giving his receiver a chance to make the play. Case in point today, he gave Daquan Felton an opportunity to make a play in the corner. He gave Jordan Bly on kind of a wheel route an opportunity to make a play, and both plays were intercepted. And I asked Jaxson Dart, can you be unafraid to make mistakes in practice? And I thought this was interesting, and you always get this from quarterbacks. He's confident in who he is, so he's not afraid to make a mistake. He's not afraid to get screamed at on the sideline. Now, does that change second day of minicamp versus week 3 in MetLife Stadium against the Chiefs if he's on the field? Sure. I'm sure that'll change. But there's something about his makeup that Brian Daboll loves, and I think Dart, it requires that to be able to handle a coach like Brian Daboll, and I think Dart has that. So we'll see. We'll see how things go. So far, so good. The BS that went out there from engagement chasers writing fake stories about how the Giants are having regrets about Jaxson Dart, nowhere near the truth. The Giants have seen everything they expected to see from Jaxson Dart at this stage of the game, and training camp will be a chance to ramp it up to another level and see where Jaxson Dart can take his game. All right, that's where we're at. We got 20 minutes on all the quarterbacks. Let's hit some the pass rush. I think that's an important spot, and that goes to Abdul Carter as well. Charlie Bullen, the outside linebackers coach, and defensive line coach Andre Patterson talked about Abdul Carter today specifically. Funny story from Charlie Bullen. He said, January 18th is his son's birthday. His son, I believe he said, is 1.5 now. So it was 1-year-old birthday. His family had plans to go to the New York Aquarium. It was a Saturday. And Charlie Bullen got a call from the front office. Didn't say it was Joe Shane or Brandon Brown or Dennis Hickey or anybody, or even Brian Daboll telling him. But the personnel department kind of made their decisions, and they were like, you know what? Abdul Carter is a player we need intensive study on. So they called Charlie Bullen and said, when you get into the office, go full steam ahead on Abdul Carter. And Bullen said he was very excited, told him he was going to his son's birthday party that day. First thing Monday morning, he was going to break down Abdul Carter and stop watching his film. Now, Bullen said what's different is that typically they usually hear from the scouting department late February when the combine rolls around about players that they should start breaking down. So the fact that Abdul Carter was specifically on the Giants' radar, number 3 overall pick, even though we went into the combine and it felt like Abdul Carter was more of a chance at being number 1 overall than he was at number 3, the Giants were well aware, and they started to get their coaches on board with what Carter brings to the table. All right. 2 players Charlie Bullen said Abdul Carter reminded him of, and it's from his days in Arizona. First one was Hassan Reddick, just thought body type and what he brought to the table. The other one was from a finish perspective. Being able to finish plays was Chandler Jones. Obviously, Chandler Jones, a Super Bowl champ with the Patriots, an outstanding player, sack leader 1 year, defensive MVP in the running. So that was a very high standard. Then Dre Patterson talked about Elvis Dumervil, who was drafted in the first round when Patterson was in Denver. He said, it reminds me of Dumervil. He said he's coached a ton of players, especially outside linebackers, defensive ends. Only one player ever came in as a rookie, showing the ability to finish plays the way Carter has, and that was Dumervil. So 2 very interesting things there. Carter, I know it's been used before, a man among boys. I don't know necessarily if that's the best way to put it. I think you just see his talent. And we're not even talking about physical contact or drills that players are wearing pads and offensive linemen can use their hands, where players are now forced to show their full array of pass rush moves. But Carter just moves differently. And it doesn't mean that Brian Burns isn't an outstanding player or Kayvon Thibodeau isn't a talent. But Abdul Carter is different. And everything the Giants have seen to this point so far, they are thrilled to have him here. And I think fans are just going to fall in love with him when they get an opportunity to see him in training camp and start showing off the arsenal that made him the best defensive player in this draft. So, favorite to be Defensive Rookie of the Year. Nothing I've seen has changed that. Make sure you check out our rookie report on NorthJersey.com. I went through every rookie on the roster, every guy, and gave you a little something from them, some more than most, but gave you what I saw from them this spring, maybe what to expect in the summer. So make sure you check that out as well. And I think that pretty much sums it up here at the Giants and what we've done this spring. A lot of positive momentum going into the summer. They're going to need it. They're going to get out early and really start fast against this schedule. But I think they like where they're at. I think the mood is changing. The mood is shifting. Now the football has to change, and you got to start stacking wins. And that starts obviously week 1 in Washington against the Commanders, week 2 in Dallas against the Cowboys, and then week 3, the home opener at MetLife, Sunday Night Football against Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and the Kansas City Chiefs. So that's where we're at. Wishing our producer, Paul Wood, is good luck to Clifton in the district softball. We all know how the summer is made up of Little League baseball and softball. So good luck to Paul coaching the districts over there in Clifton. And thanks for producing this show. As always, we are an award-winning show now. Now it's official. The Society of the Silurians Journalistic, we won a Journalism Merit Award. I'll be heading to the award ceremony tonight in New York City to accept it on behalf of Paul and the All In podcast. So much appreciated. And then before we go, I want to get to, I promised I would answer some questions if anyone had any on social media. So let's see if we got any questions, and I'll hit them, quick hitters, if you will, if we get them right off the bat. All right, D. Cowan, obviously he's always in the mix. How many undrafted wide receivers in camp, or of the many undrafted wide receivers in camp, who do you think is the best chance to make the 53? I'm going to give you a sleeper here, and I think he's going to be battling for that special teams job that Bryce Ford Wheaton claimed last year. That's Dalen Cambry. He's a special teams ace from Louisiana. He had a heck of a minicamp. He's a slot guy, so he's not going to be necessarily getting reps with Wan'Dale Robinson out there. But Cambry has been the most impressive rookie wide receiver at this point. You're going to have Bo Collins, you're going to have Daquan Felton, and you're going to have Juice Wells and Jordan Bly too. So probably 5 of them, all 5 of them, have an opportunity to make the practice squad. And you're just going to have to see. It's going to be a war of attrition for them, who stays healthy at the right time. But right now, to me, the one guy that has a chance to push for a spot on the 53 would be Cambry. Nice player, great short area quickness, and if he's as good on special teams, on the coverage teams, as people say he is, he could challenge for a roster spot. All right, what else we got? All right, Beckett 2046 4231. It's actually real, has a photo, so we'll go there. Say Russ were to get hurt in early October or late September, who would start, Winston or Dart? It's still early, and Dart may not be ready, but he's taking second team reps. Yeah, it's still early. You got to see where you're at, but I could see both players getting that opportunity. if that were to happen. But it might mean, what's the timetable for the injury to QB1? Is it a short-term injury? If it's a short-term injury that they expect Russsell Wilson to come right back, then I think Jameis Winston might get the spot starts. If it's something that they expect Russ to be out long-term, then maybe you turn to Jaxson Dart, depending on where he's at. But it's a good question, but I really think we have to decide where they're at later on in, once the season hits, to truly appreciate where they're at. So those are the two questions. Depressed New York sports fan, what are the chances we see significant starts from Dart this year? Right now, I'd say 65%, 70% that Jaxson Dart will start, let's say, a quarter of the season. I think, if Russsell Wilson plays well, I think Russsell Wilson will continue to play as long as the Giants are competitive in winning games. And similar to 2004, not exactly the same, but, Kurt Warner had this team one game over 500, and the Giants made the organizational decision to go to Eli Manning. So if the Giants are 6-5 at some point and they feel that Jaxson Dart is ready, he may pull the trigger. But it's a fine line to walk. A lot of people think Jaxson Dart saves Brian Daboll's job and all that stuff. I'm not a believer that Daboll or Shane enters this season on the hot seat that everyone says they do. But let's not forget, Jaxson Dart could easily lose jobs as opposed to keeping jobs if he does not play well. So it's a fine line. There needs to be a balance struck from Brian Daboll's position as a coach. You don't want to play Jaxson Dart too soon. Have him not look good. If the team is losing, then is the front office truly believing in your ability to develop quarterbacks? That's the ace in the hole here, but I don't know if Brian Daboll wants to play that ace until he knows Jaxson Dart is ready to be competitive in this spot. So that's something to keep an eye on. I don't think it's an automatic one way or the other. Jaxson Dart saves the jobs of the front office and the coaching staff. You got to see where they're at. If anything, Abdul Carter may save jobs more than Jaxson Dart does early on in this season if this pass rush becomes what we think it can become. So I gave you a little tease of wrapping the show. Then we hit some questions. We're now at the half-hour mark. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Again, appreciate you guys bearing with us for the hiatus that we took the last couple weeks. But we will be back full steam ahead for another season later this summer. Paul and I have things working. We'll figure out what we got going on. But as always, you are all in, and we appreciate you being all in as well. And we're all in on this podcast and our coverage of the New York Giants. So stick with me at NorthJersey.com and The Record and this podcast. We're going to take it to another level next season. Looking forward to adding and continuing to improve on what we already do. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And we'll catch you sometime in July here on the All In with Art Stapleton podcast.